Jack, welcome. Good morning. Welcome to our podcast. How is it going on a Saturday morning this day?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're really, really welcome. I'd like us to really actually begin with a quotation from, well, not a quotation, but with a quote from your book, your recent one, Fire in the Dark, and
Okay,
maybe we can build from there.
sure.
For all time, wherever and wherever we go, it has always been our purpose and our passion to build the fire in the dark. For those who are still uninformed about your book, we're going to put it down in the description below. What does this fire in the dark stand for?
Well, the fire in the dark, it's a great metaphor because everyone can understand it all around the world. And basically, the idea behind it, I wanted to talk about masculine spirituality and masculinity generally. And when I wrote The Way of Men, I talked about an idea of the perimeter. And that's really kind of always been the job of men, is to protect the perimeter. And a fire creates a natural perimeter. It's how we create order in the world. It goes back to caveman days and all that kind of thing. When you go somewhere, you set up a fire, and all of a sudden, when the sun goes down, there's a perimeter of light all around it. And within that perimeter of light, there is order. And outside of it, there is the unknown and chaos. And so it's the job of men to create this area of order wherever they go. And so that was the metaphor that I used. And that's what really Fire in the Dark is about.
Yeah, I really like the division within the book in terms of the divisions between the order and the chaos. Actually, that is the chaos and the cosmos itself. But maybe we can build upon it later on because I want to touch upon a topic that's kind of basic at heart with the topic that you've been actually talking about right now. So the fire in the dark is basically, setting and taking care of the perimeter of basically, and we can build upon this and explain a little bit more in depth of the gang that man is a part of and his family and so on and so forth. But also you've quoted actually Robert Moore's work, which I greatly enjoyed, but read really like a really, really long time ago, King Warrior Magician Lover.
Yes.
And he basically, within his work, states the total opposite of what you're actually, not the total opposite, but he's stating the present state of men that you're trying to solve through your own work and through your work as it was presented in your actual newest book. And the quote is, there is an ongoing outright demonization of man and a slander against masculinity. And you have actually pointed out that this has only intensified at the moment. So in order to actually understand how this fire in the dark can help a man reveal himself and to actually build himself and build this gang and build his own community, could you explain again through your own point of view, how does this demonization of man take place in the current state, in the current time, and what can be done through the fire in the dark to basically extinguish it?
Well, it's a worldwide phenomenon that's been happening for a really long time. And King Warrior Magician Lover was really written, I think maybe in the 80s or early 90s.
Mm.
And it was kind of the first wave of what's called the men's movement. And but the thing is that book was written by a guy who was really a feminist. And so there's a lot of like apologizing for being a man in that book. And so I wanted to take some of the ideas from it because there are a lot of good ideas in it, and then shift it to a more pro-masculine point of view. And so, the problem has been obviously that masculinity is demonized everywhere. They don't want us to be strong. They don't want us to be, independent. Most big world governments and so forth, they want us to be as dependent as possible. And that's been the thrust. So you see, like the UN makes statements about how masculinity is terrible and it's a disease, and you see it in Western governments and Eastern governments, and it's just been a kind of a worldwide push to make men weaker and softer, because men who are weak and soft are easy to control.
And that's like a really recent, basically, phenomenon because throughout the ages, the governments wanted, as I understood from your own work, to be strong. Like in the Roman era, you needed men to be strong, whereas in the recent times, it has been a state, okay, the government is strong enough in order to subjugate everybody below itself.
Exactly. I mean, if you're looking at the world from a very nationalistic point of view, which is what most people did throughout history. It's like if you're Bosnian, you want Bosnia to be strong, and if you're America, you want America to be strong, and that is no longer the case. And you see, all governments all around the world are doing this thing where they want their men to be as soft as possible because they aren't really nationalistic anymore. They don't really care about what happens to their country because the people who are running the countries in many cases are people who have investments all around the world, and they're worried about big business and global business and all these kind of things. And so any kind of rootedness or nationalism or this idea that we are a people, whatever we are, is a threat to that. Because it's just inconvenient. It's inconvenient to the forces that want to, you used to have these, in America, you used to have these robber barons in like the early 20th century, late 19th century. And, they built railroads and did all these things and they had all this money, but they were still rooted in a place. And now what you have is the wealthiest people really aren't rooted in any place at all. So they don't want you to care if they take a factory that employed all the people in your town and move it to some other country where it's cheaper. Because why should they care about that? They have their investments everywhere. They don't care. So, and obviously that's where the big money is. So the big people in government who take their donations, they serve those people rather than the people who actually elected them.
But that's, it could be argued that that's something that happens like on the higher levels, but on the grassroots level, what are the, let's say, the practical, quote unquote, practical examples of this demonization of men? Because I think it's really difficult for people to reconcile. So this is just from my own point of view. The second wave of feminism, for example, wave of feminism with the third and actually more radical wave of feminism that, it could be argued doesn't really go for the rights of women, but actively in some respects and in some cases goes in actively in accordance to getting most out of the masculinity as possible, but in a negative way, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So could you perhaps like explain to those listening and viewing what might be like, it could be a twofold question actually. What do you believe is the root of healthy feminism, and how do you think that unhealthy feminism goes against the grain of masculinity in practical examples?
Well, I mean, the most radical ends of feminism have been to make men and women the same, which of course men and women aren't the same, and so it's kind of based in a lie. And so in order to perpetuate that lie, they have to basically crush everything that men do and elevate everything that women do. And you see that all around the world. Like if a man lifts a weight, it's who cares? But if a woman lifts a weight, oh my God, it's amazing. And you see that everywhere. And it's really unfortunate. I think that women actually got a raw deal. There's an idea, if you're a man and you have a daughter, or maybe you only have a daughter, you want her to be able to do all the things in the world that she can. You want to be able to realize her potential. And I think that was what men were sympathetic to in early parts of feminism. But now, feminism created women in jobs in nice cities and whatever, but most women don't have cool jobs. Men have worked throughout history, and there's an idea that having a career is glamorous, and most jobs that men have done have been hard jobs. I mean, they pay you to do it because no one wants to do it. That's, most jobs have been hard. Men have worked in coal mines and farms and things that are hard. They've done a lot of hard work. And now what you have is, sure, at the top echelon of women in cities and so forth, you have these women with these exciting careers, But, you know, like in America, there's also tons of women who can't be with their families because they have to go to Walmart every day and work as a checkout lady and whatever. And so they end up having less than they had before. And there was a really big demonization of women staying home and taking care of children and so forth. And I don't think they've got a great deal out of that. And what you end up is with a lot of women who are like hooking up with guys in their early 20s and so forth. But then, you know, they get to a point in life where like that's all they're doing. And so, you know, like feminism may have given some women jobs, but it also gave people Tinder. You know, like it's a double-edged sword. You know, there's a lot of bad that came out of it as well.
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna like bookmark the second question that I have in my mind before we get through this train of thought. And it's exactly my opinion, the point that you made earlier on, like the demonization of women staying at home and being a mother and being a good mother. People seem to forget that there's a reason why nature is called Mother Nature, because it gives birth. It gives birth. And in my point of view, there is nothing more. So this is something that may be a good point for discussion in regards to your book. There's nothing more godlike than giving birth to a new human being, you know, in metaphorical forms, right? And people seem to forget that, you know, okay, women need to have more options, and I stand by it. Women need to have this, women need to have that, but it should not go against the grain of the beauty of what women have done traditionally throughout history.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a really big push to say that everything that happened before the 20th century is bad. And that's not the case. You know, like women have obviously, being a mother is a huge contribution to society.
Yeah,
it's a huge contribution to a family. And what you have is a lot of then young men and young women who don't have any real parental guidance in their lives because their parents are so busy. And, you know, what's been interesting about like the pandemic or whatever is that a lot of people have been educating their kids at home because they had to. And that's what used to happen all the time. And their parents were really involved in their lives. And, you know, public schools kind of, you know, at a certain point became daycare centers for kids, and they'd get educated by the schools instead of by their parents, which is, you know, it's almost a very communist kind of idea, you know, like they're like, oh, the children belong to all of us and not just the parents, you know, like we'd send them to the schools and educate them into the state. And that's a lot of what's really happened. And you know, kids need that human connection. And women are really well suited to do that job. I mean, you know, I don't have any kids, but, you know, like, and this changes, I guess, when you have kids a little bit, but the sound of screaming kids is like, like I can't handle that. But women love that. Like women naturally gravitate towards that. And they're really good at dealing with kids because evolutionarily speaking, that has been their job for a really long time. And it's unfortunate that they're having that job taken away from them so they can, you know, go work at Walmart or go work at some store or, you know, something that really isn't very important at all.
Yeah, and I think it makes it a lot more confusing for them. I mean, you know, with the present narrative, with the narrative that says that there is something that you must do. And I think that's a really important point to make. Okay, perhaps I'm not sure. I'm 23 years old. I still need experience and I still need stuff to read. But it's like, I'm pretty damn certain that a lot, like a 99.9% of the things in life, except the ones that you really need to, you know, go with and or go against, should fall into the should area, not must area. And when people like radical feminists, from what I've seen and from what I've heard, tell that something is a must, like you must have a fruitful career by the time you're 35. But on the other hand of the spectrum, by the age of 35, most of the women are the most fertile by that age. So how do you balance the drive for a career with the drive to have a family? So I think that's really, really important for people to understand. And I'm not sure if you agree with this, but that there needs to be a less of a must narrative and more of a here's your options narrative.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they have an agenda, so they want to control people. I mean, and that's a really big push. I mean, I'm about as American as you get, and so like I hate being controlled, and that's
Freedom.
part of our genetic
Yeah.
thing is that I don't really want to be told what I have to do, and yeah, feminism does tell women what they have to do, and it maybe isn't always what's best for them or what they want to do, but feminism has used a lot of shaming language, for men and women. Men, it's toxic masculinity, which basically means anything that feminists don't like. Toxic masculinity really doesn't mean anything. It's just a shaming phrase that they use in the way that they use like you're racist if you don't do what I say. It's the same thing they use. Your toxic masculinity because you disagreed with them. It's a way to control people, and obviously they do that for women. If a woman wants to stay home and have kids, she's kind of demonized as someone who's not as good as someone who's working in a career. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a big company or whatever, but it's really not that exciting, and it's really not that fulfilling. I've worked at a lot of jobs and so forth, and most of them are just jobs. They don't fulfill you. The companies don't love you.
Yeah.
I think that people do need to have more options. And I think that if people want to have healthy families, they have to have parents that are really involved in their kids' lives. And, when you have both people working all the time, that's really hard to maintain.
There needs to be some form of a balance needs to be stricken, and there needs to be dialogue, and putting everything under toxic masculinity basically denounces the possibility of a fruitful conversation and argumentation. But let's go back to the way of men, if you will. All of this makes it really confusing for us, for men, and especially from my point of view, for young men to understand their role in the world. How do you think? Is it through a forming of a gang? Is it through forming a perimeter with a gang? How do you think that a young man should go about trying to at least find his own role in the world? Where should he look for? And where should he look at, actually?
Well, one of the things I always say about evolutionary psychology is that the best thing that explains it is sex. Because, sex isn't necessary. If you're going to have kids, you have to have sex like a handful of times in your entire life. It's not something that we need to do. It's something that we want to do, and it makes us happy. And, people spend all their money and all their time looking for sex and whatever. And it's because it's part of our evolutionary drives. And that's not the only evolutionary drive that we have. And there are things that men need to do in their lives to feel confident and fulfilled as men. And they aren't necessary. And that's been the big argument of feminism, like masculinity isn't necessary anymore. We don't need them to defend us because we have the government to do it, which is the government is just kind of a replacement for men. It's outsourced. But my job is not to be necessary. It's not to do what you need me to do. To be fulfilled in my life, there are certain things that I need to do anyway. To feel more confident. And so I think that for men, they really need to explore that side of themselves, whether or not they're going to be needed to go fight a war or whatever, because we may and we may not. But I think that men do need to explore the side of themselves that needs to demonstrate strength and courage and mastery and honor to other men. And so that's why I always say I think the best way for most men to do it. I mean, if they don't work out, they probably should,
Jiu-Jitsu. Because
that changes you. When people recognize you as being strong, that changes the way you interact with the world, and it changes your psychology. And the same thing happens like if you go and practice martial arts with men. It's really, really healthy for men to do that. To be able to go and have that interaction with other men where like, I'm trying to kill you. No, I'm trying to kill you, and go back and forth. And then they sort it all out because it's usually the friendliest thing in the world. But in that moment of competition, I think that men, they play sports in high school or whatever, and then they just stop. And I think that men need that for their entire lives. They need to have some element of that because it makes you more confident and makes you more sure of yourself and makes you understand who you are as a man in relationship to other men. And I think that that's really important. Psychologists and so forth always look at like men in the relationship to women, but men also have relationships with other men in terms of like how I see myself as a man has to do with the way other men see me and the way that other men evaluate me. So I think that you need to surround yourself with men who are better than you in a lot of things. And those guys will push you and in a way that women won't. Because a lot of times women will push you in a way that is best for them or that they want. And that isn't necessarily what's good for you. And so you need to be around men who will hold you accountable in a different way. And I think that when you have a group of men around you who, admire you in some way, or that you've demonstrated something that makes them respect you in some way, that leads you to be much more confident as a man.
And this is something I actually think you mentioned in your Way of Men book. You mentioned the martial arts, and I'm not sure if I'm biased or if I'm imagining things because I trained jiu-jitsu. I think it was about jiu-jitsu. Was it like you mentioned?
It might have been. I didn't do jiu-jitsu at that time when I wrote that book, but I do now.
Oh, okay.
I did more. When I wrote The Way of Men, I did a little more striking. But now I'm a little older, and so jiu-jitsu is a little better than getting punched in the face all the time. Although that's still fun too. But like it's you don't get any faster as you get older. Yeah. But jiu-jitsu you can do for your whole life, and jiu-jitsu or grappling or whatever you want to call it. So and if you do that, and then there is a really good feeling that you get from that. I mean, you have good days and bad days. You have days when like everybody submits you and you don't know why, and then you have days when you're like winning. And you have that really natural, healthy competition with other men that's really valuable.
Yeah, and this is the exact thing that you actually mentioned in your book. It was about not just about having that element of competition, not just having basically having yourself surrounded with quote unquote, not quote unquote, but with pretty similar men, with pretty similar friends or acquaintances, but it's also about a healthy addition or retraction from your ego, because there's no lying on the mat. There's no lying in the martial arts. You know where your place is, and you're not angry because of it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You see all these guys who watch these action movies, and they think they think they know what they were going to do if something happened, and 9 times out of 10, that is not what they're going to do, and it's going to be a mess. And and that's true for everybody. I think in a real scenario of violence, I mean, you really don't know exactly how you're going to handle it, and unless you've done it a lot. But yeah, if you train all the time, you have a much better idea of where that's going to go. And it is, as you said, there's I have a thing with the word ego. It just means self, but there is a thing where you can't have this imaginary version of yourself that is so much better than it really is. It definitely it shows you what reality is versus your fantasy of how cool you are. And I think that that's really important for men too, because you can imagine that you're anything, but until you actually go and do something, that really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's opposite from being a daydreamer. It's like I think it was Roosevelt who said it, like keep your feet on the ground and your eyes up towards the stars. And there's like, you reminded me of it was like a satirical web portal, satirical news portal, The Onion. There's a video like average man less successful in real fights for 1,000%. And
yes, I know what you're talking about. Yes.
It's really
like 1,000% less effective in a fight than
I'm so sad they stopped like filming. Let me just refer to the role of let me just find this. One second. In terms of finding idols. Oh, okay, here it is. A quotation from your book. And while it is a tragedy the boys come of age without men to look up to, Perhaps it is an even greater tragedy that they have nothing beyond man that fills them with wonder, no vision of perfection. A, how does a man build a vision of perfection today? And B, perhaps that could be an A, that could be a first question actually. How does a man look for someone to admire basically in today's world? How do you separate, and I'm not sure if this is the right way to pronounce it, the wheat from the shaft?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think what I was talking about in Fire in the Dark with that was idealism. And the idea of I think that in many ways, that's what we've always thought of as our gods and our heroes. I mean, you look at stories of like Heracles and all these people, you know, like you don't know if they actually really did any of those things, but their stories have been built up because that becomes the ideal of like, that's what man is. And that's what we have that in superhero movies today. Like there's this, you know, what is the most masculine, you know, and the thing that nobody is, you know, like Superman. You know, like no guy is actually Superman, but it's an ideal. So it's an ideal beyond what is capable of humans, but it's something to shoot for. It's a new North Star. It's a direction. And I think in terms of looking for real guys to look up to in life, I mean, there are a lot of men who have accomplished a lot of things. And I think that's what you really need to look for is substantive accomplishments. And a lot of what we have in modern society is like the elevation of actors. Like actors who really haven't done anything except they're really good at acting, you know, which is something, you know, that's a craft, and that's, you know, it's not easy. But there are so many men who have done so many things, but you look at the magazines and so forth, and it's just interviews with actors. And, you know, that's actually something that I'm working on right now. I'm working on, it'll come out next month. I'm starting an online site called Chest. With a friend of mine, and we're actually interviewing men who are not actors, you know, and men who actually have done something in their lives. There's this guy who he's running 100 Ironmans in 100 days. Like he's running an Ironman every day. Like, so the running, the biking, the swimming, he's doing that every day for 100 days, which is amazing.
Like what is it like?
Know,
except from that, he's basically only sleeping. What? Because like to finish an Ironman, it's like under 18 hours or something like that.
It's a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot every day. We're gonna go shoot some pictures of him next week doing it. I think he's about, you know, he's up into like the 80th day or something right now. So I think he's pretty tired. But you know, I mean, that's something amazing that men are doing, and you can look up to that. I mean, the drive and the intensity and the commitment that it takes to do something like that, that's a lot better than like looking at how some millionaire actor spends his money. You know, and, you know, I went and interviewed a guy the other day who's started, you know, lost, you know, $1 million businesses. His name's Sean Whalen. And you go and he's, you know, a really wealthy guy, and he's done a lot of things. And he has this brand called Lions Not Sheep, where he you know, coaches people and so forth. And I went and talked to him the other day, and you know, shot pictures of him in his Lamborghini and all this stuff. And he's a good guy, and he has done a lot of things in his life, and he helps people out. And you know, so there's so many. And I have another guy that we're interviewing for that magazine. I guess I'm talking about that now. You know, who's he's a school teacher. And he started a program to help young men. And so like, there's this whole special program that you can go through as a young man to become a better man. And so, you know, which is a really, you know, I think courageous thing to do nowadays, because teachers don't want you to do that. Schools don't want you to do that. But he has this other program. It's called the Apogee program that young men can go through. And I actually, the Way of Men is on the curriculum for that program.
Oh,
so
nice.
I actually called in and had the like these like 16, 17, 18-year-old guys ask me questions.
What are the most frequent questions that they asked you?
I think they were mostly questions about the book. I forget what they were asking me, honestly, but you know, it's just cool to be involved in something like that. And that's something that we really need. I mean, that guy is leading young men, and that's something really admirable. And so I think we need more focus on men who really deserve to be admired in the world. And I think we just don't have enough of that.
True, and we don't have enough. Like we don't have enough man such as that professor, such as that teacher, is that like the curriculum that he's having, just in broad terms, in order to understand it more completely? Do you think it's something that he is using as more of an educational platform, or something that could at least, like in some way, in some part, in some respects, serve as a substitution for the lack of like the so-called initiation processes that we're lacking in today's society?
Certainly. Yeah, men are always looking for some kind of transition because, there's an old saying that a woman is always a woman. I think Yukio Mishima said it. No, a woman is always a woman, but a man has to be created. Like a man has to become a man.
Okay.
And we don't have a lot of opportunity for that to happen because we don't have societies that have an agreement on what being a man is. And so like there's no way to really be initiated into manhood. I mean, you used to get married at a certain age, and then you were a man and you were head of a household, and that was how that worked. And now you don't really have anything specific like that. So a lot of guys are searching in all kinds of different ways for how do I cross that threshold? How do I go from being a boy to being a man? And so, yeah, that is something that I think that, maybe that program is helping some of those young men do.
And how do you think that, like, from your own point of view, how do you think that this threshold is to be, overcome? How do you think it's supposed to be leapt over? Because, of course, it comes down to, the personal preferences and the way things, are set up in an individual man's life. But I have a sense that it has to do a lot with overcoming of fear that everybody feels. And you mentioned this brilliantly in your book throughout, a couple of examples in terms of like how like ancient, like I wouldn't say societies, but let's say societies, would basically force a boy to spend a night, let's say, alone and overcome his fears. And if he was successful in it, he would, in some terms, reappear and be reborn as a man the next day.
Yeah, I mean that's been always been a huge part of what being a man is overcoming fear, because we all have fear. We all have fear. We all have confusion and all these things. And obviously, from an evolutionary standpoint, our role has been to go out and face fear because no one else will. And so that's always, I think, in every society, everywhere. Part of being a man has always been about overcoming fear, because that's what they needed men to be able to do. You had to be able to depend on all the men in your tribe to go out, and if you were being attacked, to face your fear and deal with the attackers, or to go hunt this giant animal. The animals that they used to hunt in our history are like aurochs, which are extinct, but like they're like giant bulls, and they're terrifying. And men had to do so many things like that in history. And so that's always been part of being a man. So we don't really have that anymore. And people do it in all sorts of ways. I see a lot of guys, obviously, because, I'm in contact with a lot of guys in different men's movements and so forth. They're taking their sons hunting. And hunting a lot of times is a really good initiatory experience. Doing that for the first time, and, having that encounter with life and death. And, it's kind of a struggle, and it's a big ordeal going out hunting. And there are all things like that. Obviously, you have to manufacture those experiences, I think, in modern society, because we don't have a system built in, for every single man. So I think it's really part of the role of fathers to help create that for their sons in the modern world, and set a difference between, like, okay, you were a boy, now you have to go do this thing and face your fear and do something that's really hard and that you're kind of afraid of. And then when you get to the other side of that, you've transitioned in your life. You're more, and when you've done something like that and you've faced any kind of fear, you are different for it. You are more confident. You're like, well, I've gone through that, so what else could I do? Whereas, if you never are in a situation where you've had to do something that's really, really uncomfortable, which is the case for a lot of people, because modern people are very spoiled. And, it's like, if you've never had to do something that you really don't want to do, because it's scary and you might get hurt, or you might be made fun of or whatever. If you don't have to go through that situation, I think that then you're living a constant, like, we were talking about, like kind of a constant fantasy world of what you are and what you would do if that happened. And, because that shows you who you are and forces you to become someone else.
Yeah, but how does like purely, let's say, I know, and this is something that you pointed out within your book at the very end of it, before the afterword, I believe, and not before, but within the afterword, is that basically you're mostly concerned about, the, let's say, for lack of better words, with the poetics. But in terms of like the practical example, once you become okay, this is what I want to say. Actually, I'm all over the place. There's a lot of, and you've mentioned this in your book, there's a lot of things that a man can do in the present day and age that will sort of glorify the things that he thinks he has, but he doesn't really in his real life. Such as, for example, you mentioned, the delusion that you're a much more skilled fighter than you are. Then there is the pornography, which is a phenomenal, basically, substitute for ever going out and approaching a woman. There's all this fast food, that's available, and it's a really good substitute for pulling out like half an hour each week to prep your meals. How do you think, from a practical standpoint, from a practical point of view, is a young man, especially like young man, because I can only speak from that point of view, how is he supposed to, basically say no to those easy ways out and approach the more difficult task of becoming a real man, and therefore actually becoming more valuable to the men around him and to the society itself?
Well, I wrote an essay years ago titled "All Training is Sacrifice," and every kind of training that you do is in some way a sacrifice to a future self, because you have an idea of who you want to be, and that's why we need ideals, right? You have an idea of what is the best version of me. How could I become better? It's like, I know what I am, and I know what I can do. What could I do? And to get to there, it always takes work, and it always takes some kind of hard work. Like you said with fast food or whatever. Well, I would really, honestly, I would love to eat at like Wendy's or McDonald's every day, because I know a lot of people don't like that, but I love me some French fries. I would love to eat stuff like that every day, but I don't, because I want to look like this. And I want to be healthy. And, it's obviously not just how you look, but like I'm 46 years old. I'm actually very, very, very healthy compared to most people my age, because I spend a lot of time training. I went and did, I think, 750 calories of cardio before I got on this show. And I train every week, and I trained last night with some at this really cool gym that I go to called Nonprofit, and did a whole bunch of horrible exercises that it was a pretty fun night, to be honest. But it's hard work. A lot of hard work that I wouldn't necessarily even make myself do, but I go to that place and make myself do it so that I have this better health and the things that I want. And so everything that you're going to do like that is some kind of sacrifice. It's easy to just, buy fast food and sit on your couch and not work out and not, same thing with learning. It's like, well, if you want to be good at something, you're going to have to spend a long time learning how to do it. I would like to learn how to do a really good handstand right now. So if I'm going to do it, it's going to take a lot of work. I can kind of get it okay, but if I wanted to really, really do it well, there's all these exercises that you have to do, and you have to do them over and over again. And the same thing happens, obviously, if you wanted to be good at math, you have to go and do a lot of math. And it's not going to be fun every second. In fact, most things that are worth anything really aren't fun after you get started. I've written a good number of books in my life. And man, every one of them, I tell, like, after I'm done, I'm like, I'm never doing that again. That was horrible. Because it's so much work.
Yep.
And The Way of Men I wrote while I was still driving trucks, and I was, on the weekends, other people were going out and having fun. I was like, no, I got to write this book. And so I'd sit home and write this book instead of doing all the fun stuff. But now I get to talk to you because I've done this thing. Mm. And so I put the work in, and so I get the reward back. And so I think that it's all about, a future orientation. rather than a present orientation. If you're present oriented, you're like, whatever feels good right now, I do it. And if you're future oriented, you have an ideal of who you want to be and what you want to accomplish in life, and you make sacrifices toward that as you go to approach that goal.
So from what I get from you is like basically maybe 2 or 3 pointers towards, for young men to become more masculine and to become more men in and of themselves. The first is the overcoming of fear. The second and the third one would be basically hard work and understanding that if you want to achieve something for your future self, that it takes sacrifice. But I would add the fourth thing, which I like, which is the basis of the Way of Man book, and it's being in the right gang and like giving back to your gang in a proper way. Because we're really, really close to the end of our conversation, to the pre-specified time for it. Could we perhaps dwell a little bit in terms of what constitutes a gang of men?
Well, I use the word gang because I was being cheeky a little bit. I was obviously trolling people because people think of street gangs and it's this horrible thing, And you can join a group of men who is not a positive group of men, they'll push you, but they'll push you to manipulate you. And that's something that I think young men have to walk out for, because you'll see a guy who seems tough, and then you want to be part of the tough gang, but maybe that guy's not actually doesn't really have your best interests at heart. And maybe he's just going to make you do things so that he can get money, or so that he can look tougher, or that, so you want to choose the right group of men to surround yourself with. I always, The Way of Men, there's a chapter in it that says, there's a difference between being a good man and being good at being a man. I would like to be surrounded by men who are both good men and good at being men. I think it's, I just moved to a new city, less than a year ago. And so I'm finding a new group of men to hang out with. And, I'm a little spoiled because obviously I have a network from being a writer, but tomorrow I have a handful of guys that come over to grapple with me here in my office. I have some mats laid out.
That's good.
And, it's becoming a really cool group of guys because we try to kill each other for, X period of time, but throughout that time, we're also stopping to talk, and we're talking about all kinds of different things. And usually we'll do a few different, we'll do a few rounds, and then we all end up sitting on the floor and talking about all kinds of different things in our lives, which is really important. And they're all really good guys. They're all good. I have one guy who's, has a bunch of kids, and he's a tattoo artist, and he's just a really genuinely good person. And, other guys who are a little younger but they're working really hard. They have good jobs. So it's all very positive. And so I think that's what you want to surround yourself with, is a group of guys who who are good men, who are also good at being men. And if you have a group of guys that you hang out with regularly, this is an easy example because it's martial arts, but I roll with these guys, and I feel like I have to go to jiu-jitsu class more often because I don't want them to be able to beat me. We're all basically the same level, and I'm really strong, so they take a really long time to beat me. We sometimes we roll for 10, 15 minutes, but a lot of them are getting good enough that I'm oh, they're always tapping me, so I'm I gotta go to class this week so that I learned some new tricks so I can pull them on these guys, and so I think that's at the root level. That's what you're doing with any gang of men that you're hanging out with. You want to be better for that group of men. And so you have to work harder because they're your peers, and you want to impress them, and you want to do better, and you want to have those men respect you. And so that's a motivating factor in itself. And so I think it's important to find a group of guys who are all moving in the same direction that way, and all want to be better. And that's really what you want to look for, is men who all are trying to improve their own lives and themselves as men. And if you surround yourself with guys like that, who want you to be better too, you can't really go wrong with that.
And it's really, really important, the point that you made earlier, in order to be basically respected, it's not enough to be a good man, but you also have to be good at being a man. And that's a distinction that a lot of people don't understand or don't get, or that haven't been actually exposed to. It's like, and it's a brilliant, brilliant example of like, why do we admire, you know, why do we enjoy watching the Godfather so much? The guy from like the Scarface. It's not, of course, because, he is snorting cocaine in kilograms or in pounds if you're in America, but it's because he's good at being a man. And it's a really good point, and it's perhaps the most important lesson actually that I've gotten from The Way of Man. It's all of the other virtues need to build upon the virtues that make you good at being a man. And those are like the 4 tactical virtues that, if you want, we can get into. But it's really, really important to be first good at being a man, and then also to be a good person in a way.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I think that was a really important distinction to make for a lot of people, because all different societies have their own like morality, different religions, all these different things. And so they all have their own idea of what being a good man is. And that really doesn't have to necessarily have anything to do with being good at being a man. You could be a good person. You're like, I help people, I give people money, I open doors for old ladies. I'm a generally nice person to everybody around me. But that doesn't make me good at being a man. And so I think you have to have both those things. And I think that when people confuse one with the other, then they have a really confusing discussion, and they can't really talk about masculinity in a coherent way. But once you separate those two things, like, well, what is masculinity and how do you get better at that? And then, but yeah, also be a good person as well, but those are two separate things. The examples you brought up obviously are, Scarface and Godfather, and like, they're not good men, but they're good at being men. And so that's why men like to watch them, and because they're good at asserting dominance. They're good at getting things done. They're demonstrating strength. They're doing all these things that have to do with masculinity, but not necessarily with being a good person. And so like that's why we enjoy those kind of things, because they're showing one part of the whole picture. And so yeah, it's like you want to have a balance of both those things.
Yeah, but in order to be good at being a man, you need the 4 tactical virtues. You need the strength, the courage, the skill, and the honor one, right?
Yeah. I think that's the easiest way to talk about it, because that's the tactical virtues. I came up with those for The Way of Men, and they really speak to the things that men have always needed from each other. In a survival scenario, you need the other men around you to be strong, because men are naturally stronger. That is one of the things that makes us different. And if you can't carry your own weight, if you can't get things done, it's always useful to be strong. And so men need that from each other, and men need courage. As we said, conquering fear is a huge part of being a man, and it always has been. And obviously, any man who's good at something, virtuosity, which has vir in the root of it, which is man, but virtuosity is like mastery. You're really good at something. You might not be like the strongest one, but maybe you're really good at shooting arrows, or maybe you're good at doing something else that's really useful to the group. I mean, people always say, what do you need in your group? I'm like, everybody needs a mechanic, because somebody's car is going to break down. Yep. You always need, people who are really skillful as well. And you can't discount the importance of that. And then honor, as I referred to it in The Way of Men, honor has a really complicated definition in Western society, because it's conflated with Christianity and your relationship with God and all that kind of thing. But honor, as I think the most basic form of it, is the other men in your peer group. You're demonstrating that you respect them, and they demonstrate that, if you have been honored, that means that they're saying, hey, we really appreciate you. We're really good at something. And, to demonstrate your honor is like, hey, I care about what you guys think of me. So it's your reputation within a group of men is really what honor has always been. And, I always say, like, when honor is brought up, it's always usually a bad thing. When you're involved, like, I have to do this because of my honor, it means you really don't want to do it, but you want the other men around you to respect you. And so when men used to duel and stuff like that, it's like, well, if I don't duel, I'll have no honor. And I'm glad that we don't duel anymore, because it became a little ridiculous. But there is a element to that, and that's always what honor has been. Is like, I want all these other men to still respect me as a man.
Yeah, it has got, as far as I understand, it has a lot to do with integrity, right? With being an integrity, like a man who has integrity is a man who does the thing that he has said that he would do and protects the people that he basically vowed to protect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, integrity has a big definition. It could be a lot of things, but I try to have integrity with as many things as possible. It's always good to be the guy that you say that you are. So if we're all striving to be the guys that we say that we are, or that we say we want to be, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I think that's a really wonderful message and a wonderful closure for our own episode of this podcast. Before we finish, might there be anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners?
Oh, not particularly. I'm just glad to be able to talk about this and talk about obviously the way of men. My Instagram is Start the World, and I'm working on this magazine called Chess Magazine that's going to come out next month, and so I'll put that out through all my channels and so forth on social media.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to put it down to the description below. Jack, Thank you once again. Thank you very much, and have a nice Saturday.
All right, thank you, you too.
Thanks.